Hey, I'm Bob at I Like to Make Stuff. Today we're gonna make a custom roof rack. Ever since I got my Land Cruiser a couple of years ago, I've wanted to put a rack on the top of it so I could easily bring lumber home. But one of the problems with adding a rack to a vehicle is it's usually made of steel and it adds a whole bunch of weight. So I've been wanting to make one out of aluminum for a long time, but the problem is I don't know how to weld aluminum yet. But not too long ago, I got a new CNC machine, and that gave me an idea. This CNC machine by CNC Router Parts is basically all made of aluminum extrusion. These are pieces that can be extruded out to just about any length, and there's a system of connectors that can put these pieces together. If you look at this machine, it looks really complex because there's a lot going on, but at its base, it's a bunch of pieces of aluminum stuck together at right angles. As you can see, the pieces of this machine are pretty substantial, and I don't need something that heavy duty for a roof rack, so I picked up something similar, but a little bit more reasonable. I used a company that manufactures this aluminum extrusion, and you basically tell them exactly the type of piece that you want and the lengths. They ship you just what you need for the project, so you do have to map it out ahead of time. I got some of these that are 1 inch by 2 inches and then 1 inch by 1 inch, and this is so that I can make a taller section on the sides and on the front, and then the inside and the back will be a little bit shorter, and that'll make it a lot easier to slide in pieces of lumber. These things all go together with some really simple connectors. So let's lay this thing out and put it together. As far as connecting these pieces, there's a ton of different ways to do it. They're really, really customizable in that respect. I got these 90-degree connectors, and these are stainless, so they should do fine outside over time. Basically, one end of this slides into that channel, and then the other extrusion slides on here. You've got a small set screw on the inside of each one of these that you tighten down, and it holds that joint together. Now, like I said, there's a bunch of different options here, so if this doesn't work for you, they have a ton of different ways to do it in all different configurations. I've got the frame put together, and it is still a little bit floppy, but I think that'll be fixed once we get it on the roof. So let's go talk about how we're gonna attach it. Depending on your vehicle, there's a bunch of different ways to attach a roof rack to it, but on this one, there's some rain gutters that a lot of people use to put a clamp around, and then that goes up and attached to the rack itself. So I looked at a bunch of different examples of how other people have done this, and I came up with 2 different techniques, and I decided to try them both on a prototype. Basically, there's this piece that hooks around the outside of the rain gutter, and then that piece sits down inside of it. So when those are clamped together and locked into the right place, this shouldn't be able to move. Now, the 2 different methods I was talking about is some people will run a bolt down and clamp them this direction. Some people run a bolt through and clamp it that direction. Some people do both. I did a test on both of them and found that going through worked just fine, so we're gonna use that method. Now that I've got the prototype, I can just measure off the different lengths of the pieces that I ended up with and then cut some new pieces and start making the first one. I'm using 1/8 inch steel for this, and that'll be plenty strong for the project, but it's also thin enough that you don't have to have any super special tools to bend it. If you've got a benchtop vise and a big hammer, you can bend it, and that's what I used here by putting it right here in this vise. Now, the only problem with that is that the bends are not always uniform side to side. Sometimes they're a little bit off, and so instead, I'm gonna use a hydraulic press brake. I did make a small metal brake as a previous project, and that's made for much thinner material than this. This is a combination of a hydraulic press and a metal brake put together, and it's pretty awesome. I'm not bending these to 90 degrees. I'm actually gonna try to match them to what I did on the prototype, so I'm gonna use it as an example and just try to match them up. Now for the small hook piece, I'm actually going to bend that using the vise just because since it's smaller, it's easier to fit in here and handle. So I'm just going to match up like the points where I kind of did my bends and then use a big old hammer. I know this is the wrong kind of hammer, but it's the biggest one I've got, so that's what I'm going to use. All right, we're gonna try these out in the rain gutter. We gotta push this one all the way in, and then line those all the way up and try to get them really tight. And it's a pretty good fit. So the next step is to figure out where they need to be in relation to each other so I can drill a hole through both of them that lines up. And so I've got them on there really tight together, and now I'm gonna mark a line where they should intersect at the top, and we'll use that when we drill the hole. I used a really small drop of CA glue to hold these two pieces together so that I could put them in the vise and keep them lined up. I used a punch to start a hole where I wanted it and then used a hand drill to drill that hole through. Due to the shape of these, it actually made it really hard to use the drill press to drill these holes. Unfortunately, when using a hand drill like this, it's really easy to try to push too hard and make the drill go too fast. Be really aware of those two things so that you don't kill your bit. I ended up turning the speed of my drill down quite a bit and using some oil to try to keep the bit cool. And after I had those holes drilled, I did a test fit on the rain gutter to see how it worked. This one turned out pretty well. It fits, which is good. Now we just gotta clean up all the edges, make sure everything is smooth and not sharp, get it ready for powder coating. But first, I gotta make 5 more. After I had the top holes drilled in each one of these brackets, they were ready for powder coating. The first step there is to clean them off really well using degreaser. After I had them cleaned, I hung them by some conductive wire from a frame that goes inside the powder coating oven. The gun gets filled up with some powder that gets positively charged. This gets attracted to the negative charge by adding a grounding clip to the metal frame that's holding all the pieces. The charge holds the powder to the pieces while it bakes in an oven. While it's in the oven, the powdered plastic melts together into a single coating on the outside of your workpiece. After you let it cool enough, you can go ahead and take it out and handle it. This was the first time I'd tried powder coating, and it turned out really well, so I cleaned off and mounted the rest of the pieces and followed the same procedure. I started to mount these brackets and then realized that it's gonna be a lot easier to mount them to the rack and put the whole thing on at one time. So we're gonna do that instead. To mount these brackets on the bottom of the rack, I use some nuts made specifically to go in these T-slots. You slide them in from the end of the extrusion, and then you can slide them down the track to put them exactly where you need them to be. Once I had those in place, I used a washer and a bolt to go through the bracket into that nut. These nuts are really handy because they allow you to slide these brackets forward and back to match the contour of the top of the vehicle. After we got it up here, I realized that there's a little bit of a curvature in the rain gutter, so there's a high spot in the middle. That means that it's not sitting flat and it can rock back and forth on the center bracket. So to get around that, we're gonna try to just add some washers in between the bracket and the rails to see if we can space out the front, space out the back, and maybe get it to be level. The washers did end up doing the trick by adding the right amount of spacing to get it lifted right, but unfortunately it also introduces a little bit of flex. So in the future, those are going to get removed, and I'll put a plate in there as a spacer to keep surface-to-surface contact between all the pieces. Now to hold down sheet goods on top of the rack, I decided to try out these toggle clamps. I just put in some bolts with some washers to make sure that they would fit inside the tracks and slid them into the T-slots on the top rail. Once I had these in place, I had to hold the bolt still so that I could tighten it. The head of the bolt wanted to spin down on the inside of the track. I made sure to place these over the top of the rails so that I could pinch a piece of material in between the rail and the clamp. Once you get these in place, you can also adjust where the foot is, and I did that with 2 scraps of 3/4 inch material. The idea being that I would probably only carry 2 sheets of plywood at a time, but I could always have some spacers with me to fill in the gap if I needed to. Then it was time to try it out.
There you go.
All right, there it is. It's pretty functional, and the cool thing is it's a platform that we can build all sorts of different hangers on and add different features to. Ultimately, it may not be the cheaper option of buying a pre-built rack, but it is really expandable, and any of these pieces that I need to swap out at any time, it'll be really easy to do. Just a few minutes ago, I got in this light bar, and it was super easy to put on because the bolts on the back of it just slide into these tracks. And that's the coolest thing about this entire rack, is it's really a platform for you to be able to add the things that you want to hold the stuff that you want. Now I've got these clamps, but I could easily make another thing to put here to hold a canoe or a kayak or a tent, some overland gear. There's all sorts of things you can do. In fact, I would love to hear from you what type of attachments you would make for this rack down in the comments. Because if you have some good ideas, we may put it in a future video. If you want to see some other projects, I've got lots over here for you to check out. And if you haven't subscribed, please go ahead and do that. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. This CNC machine is put together with some aluminum, and so you can make some sort of a clamp that clamps around to that, but it's a big hamburger. It's a big hamburger. And get it ready for powder coating. Powder coating.